Jason, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. The topic of our magazine for this issue is ESG, environmental, social, governmental policies. So the first question I'd like to ask you is how this pandemic, how COVID-19 crisis affected IFC projects that you are doing?
In fact, ESG, environment, social, and governance, is something that runs through our entire practice, be it investment, be it advisory. I'm very proud that on the advisory front, in Kiev, that is what gave birth to our corporate governance advisory practice globally. So we had a team of experts here that came up with an advisory business line that then became so robust and impactful that it was replicated across all regions of the world. But then coming back to your question on the impact of COVID on IFC's portfolio and new business, obviously the pandemic, which is not yet over, unfortunately, has created a lot of macroeconomic disturbances. On a more positive side, our portfolio remains very robust. We have a number of very strong clients that have gone through multiple crises. So unfortunately, in the Ukrainian context, many private sector clients have experience having to weather the storm, be it economic, be it financial, be it now pandemic. But we're responding to the pandemic, and we have created the COVID Rapid Response Facility. This was a global $8 billion program that was set up at the headquarters level, at Washington, D.C. level, to enable us on the front lines to respond quickly to client demand. And we've done so in Ukraine and done so throughout the region.
Can you elaborate whether you've made any, let's say, new investment decisions over the last 2 years in the course of the pandemic? Is it this fund, or is there anything else that you've been doing during these 2 years?
So we have been active. Unfortunately, there are less people in the office now, or we have less, but people, I think we've all learned that we can work very effectively in a remote mode. And the level of innovation and creativity has actually, in some cases, picked up. So over the past 2 years, I think one of the key focus areas, and this is the topic of our discussion, is ESG. And I think there's been a general awakening to the fact that we need to get better at crisis preparation. Mm-hmm. And climate is now much more in the minds, not only of IFC, but in the case of government, and the private sector, playing a leading role in thinking through what they will need to do to meet their own stakeholders' objectives and demands of them. So climate has become much more prominent in IFC's focus in Ukraine, both on the demand and the supply side. Supply meaning we want to do more in climate, but it now is very much working both ways. There are a lot more companies and the government of Ukraine coming to us directly, asking for assistance to scale up climate investment in country. And so what does that mean? We are set up in such a way that we have different industry clusters, infrastructure, what we call mass manufacturing, agri and services, and the financial sector. In addition to that, we have venture capital and funds. And if we go through each of those industry clusters, we have a number of successes that I personally am very proud of over the past 2 years. In infrastructure, at the subnational level, at the cities level, we're helping cities like Mariupol, like Lviv, like Zaporizhia, like Kryvyi Rih, improve their urban transportation to make it more sustainable. So this could be improving the bus fleet. It could be autonomous trolley buses. It could be smart city. So really scaling up urban transportation and the concept of green cities. If we look at the agri-services, we're working both on the advisory and the investment side on scaling up what we call climate smart agri. So that could be better use of technology, ag tech. It includes looking at irrigation. This is very much now on the government of Ukraine's priority. Now that the land reform has taken hold, the ending of the land moratorium sales for agricultural land has ended after 2 decades. Now the big focus is scaling up irrigation in response both to the fact that there's need for irrigation today, but also recognizing that the threat of drought is becoming more prominent. Last season was not one of Ukraine's best because of drought. So agri is another focus. And then the financial sector, ensuring that companies have access to sustainable finance. And we do that by working both with government authorities. The National Bank of Ukraine and the National Security and Exchange Commission are both a client of IFC's, where we're helping create the regulatory framework to promote green bonds, to promote better ESG reporting, but also working directly with financial intermediaries. So we're very proud of our engagement with Ukrgazbank, where we 5 years ago began on a journey with the 4th largest state-owned bank in Ukraine to convert them to an eco-bank. And now that Ukrgazbank is the leading eco-bank in Ukraine and arguably even the region, with more than $1 billion of green loans invested. And now we're taking this engagement to the next level where we have a convertible stake in the bank helping with the privatization of Ukrgazbank. And we remain confident that we'll be able to demonstrate the first large-scale privatization of a state-owned bank in Ukraine for the past 2 decades.
Can you perhaps maybe highlight any other areas where Ukrainian government has made, let's say, positive progress in terms of the green agenda, in terms of the ESG?
Yeah, so I think that I would focus on 3 factors where the government has been actually proactive in advancing the country's climate agenda. One was the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, where Ukraine has made a very public and robust commitment to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to where it was, thinking forward that they shall not produce more GHGs than where they were in the 1990s by 65%. So in other words, by 2030, if the government succeeds, their GHGs will be 65% of where it was in the 1990s. And there are a number of steps that need to happen to achieve that milestone. But this would include substantial investment. Based on many estimates, it would be about euro $10 billion of capital investment by 2030 to achieve that objective alone. The second, and arguably even more ambitious commitment, was to be net zero by 2060. And now we're talking about an order of magnitude of investment that far exceeds what I've just stated, the 10 billion euro by 2030. And then another factor, the third factor, which is playing a very strong role in the government's thinking, is the EU Green Deal. And this will have, it's both, I would say, a positive motivation and a reality check, in the sense that for Ukraine to remain export competitive, they will need to think through what policies and procedures they need to be putting in place today such that manufacturing can continue to have access to the EU markets. It also involves the energy sector, that how once, if Ukraine, and I remain confident that Ukraine will be successful in connecting to the European electricity grid, ENTSO-E, how do we export electricity to Europe? So I think the EU Green Deal will be a very strong anchor for Ukraine's climate ambitions.
Talking about ESG agenda in general, if we can just maybe take a step back, can you maybe give us your perspective of why it has become so important, especially over the last, let's say, few years? Because it's been around for a while, but over the last few years it's become much more important. Why do you think is that happening?
I come back to what are the push and pull factors that are making ESG so prominent. One is that there's a recognition that ESG is good for business. So that at its core, I think, is one of the main factors that's driving stakeholders, the business itself, but also the shareholders of these companies recognize that having good environmental and social and governance practices can actually be quantified now. IFC has combed through our own portfolio of greater than 650 companies and has found that those companies that internally within our system outperform its peers in E&S procedures and demonstrate good proactive E&S practices outperform on a return on equity basis by 210 basis points, 2.1%. That's significant. So if you look solely at the bottom line as to why companies should care about E&S, why they should care about governance, it's the bottom line. But beyond the bottom line, I think there's also a recognition that not only now do stakeholders care about the bottom line, but they're being held accountable for having good environmental and social practices. And that's another very strong drive, is that if your clients care, if your shareholders care, then you as a private sector company better care about ESG.
You already mentioned green bonds, but can I ask you to elaborate this a bit more? Because in April, IFC and NBU signed a formal agreement about green bond standards and development in connection with EU Green Deal. Can you elaborate, just tell us, maybe our readers, a bit more about this initiative?
Yeah. So this is another, I'd like to again pay compliment to the government of Ukraine, and in particular, in this case, the National Bank, as well as the National Security and Exchange Commission, where they reached out to us, recognizing that the financial regulators have a very strong role to play in ensuring sustainable finance. I couldn't agree more with that premise. And so we're very pleased that we teamed up with the National Bank and the Security and Exchange Commission to strengthen these institutions' ability to regulate. One mechanism in which we're doing so is through transparency, through reporting. That if companies, joint stock companies, but even private companies now have a framework in which they can report their ESG achievements. And by creating this framework, this transparency, we hope that it will be not only PR, public relations, in which companies can showcase their achievements in ESG, but it creates a little bit of a competitive landscape. That if you see your peer out there showing the results that they have achieved in ESG, it will provide a little bit of a nudge and impetus for others to follow the lead and the example of those companies that are outperforming as pertains to ESG. So that's the kind of the idea about the transparency, that by creating a platform for improved, and not only, it's not voluntary. For some companies, they will be obliged to share this information. It will foster better practices.
Jason, can I also ask you about green energy in Ukraine? What do you think are the perspectives of this sector? Because over the last several years, there have been a lot of, let's say, developments. What do you think about the future? Is it, the sector which is worth developing in Ukraine? What's your perspective on that?
Well, we touched earlier in the conversation about Ukraine's commitments, the NDCs, the European Green Deal. So the answer is
won't do it without it.
It's obvious that Ukraine must tap into its renewable energy potential. The good thing is that Ukraine is rich in wind and it's rich in solar, particularly in the south of the country. Renewable energy is a bit complex in the sense that it was one of the bright spots of FDI, foreign direct investment, not too long ago. Unfortunately, there's been a few bumps on the road, but I remain confident that because of these strong driving factors, we need to realize the potential in renewable energy. And I think that it's only a matter of time before we are in a position to have much more substantial investment in solar, in wind, in biomass, in biogas, and equally important is battery storage. Because one of the limitations not only is the problems we've had with the feed-in tariff system, and what we need to have is the transition to auctions, but the other challenge is the grid. That when you introduce more wind and solar into the grid, which is intermittent power source, there's a need for balancing power. And Ukraine doesn't have a great ready source of balancing power. So IFC is now working together with Ukrenergo, together with the Ministry of Energy, to bring private sector into battery storage. And this will complement a World Bank project where the World Bank is working with Ukrhydroenergo, Ukrhydro, to also have a public sector solution for introducing the ability to store electricity on those days when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining.
Still, a lot of Ukrainian companies and CEOs and owners of Ukrainian companies, I think, are a bit skeptical about the overall, ESG agenda. Why the companies should invest in this? Why should they care? You already answered that question, but can you maybe just, as a final comment, tell us, to those who are still skeptical, why should they change? Why should they change their attitude?
So I would refer, Andrei, these skeptical people you refer to, not to me and not to you, but have them speak to our clients. Those who have already adopted these practices, who have worked with the likes of the IFC. And I would be extremely confident that the responses that they will get will further convince them that not only have, again, they improved the relationship with the communities in which they operate, not only have they improved their relations with various stakeholders that are important to their business, but they're actually a better managed and more profitable business thanks to improved ESG practices.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you, Andrei.
Really insightful conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.